having that much to do with it. But the colonialism that we're talking about in regards to decolonization, it's sort of like, think about like the initial colonization of the Americas, the USA, Australia, Canada, Africa, stuff like that. So much more direct rather than you using colonialism as a metaphor. And I guess like, hold on, I've made videos on this before, so I have like a definition sort of written up to sort of introduce here. The key thing is to remember here, like, calling someone like a colonizer is not an insult. And, it can be an insult, but it's not an insult by default, right? It's like describing sort of like a relation that they have, a societal relation. It's like calling someone working class or something, or bourgeois or something, Though a lot of people take it as an insult, a lot of people use it as an insult. I use it as an insult, but it doesn't mean that, it always has to be one, or that being a colonizer makes you a bad person or whatever,
Do you know what probably makes it sound like an insult?
That it's used as one?
Well, I think even I heard Professor Flowers say this. The act of colonizing someone is probably, I imagine we would both agree that it's an aggressive act. And usually when moral agents take aggressive acts, some sort of retribution can be justified. So I think that's why. So when somebody says like, oh, you're a colonizer, the implication is that like, I need to be punished for it. Not me, but whoever you're talking about. So that would be my guess.
I think like, ideally no one would want anything like that to happen, Like, it's the same sort of thing with like, I assume like a fair bit about like theoretical socialism. Like no one wants there to be like just worthless, like for no good reason, punishments of people who used to be like bourgeois or something just for the sake of it. But if these people were to like resist to the death or something, they wouldn't leave you with an option.
So I also don't know if like even the term colonizer seems a little bit weird. Or I guess finish talking about that, and then I can just ask about the comment.
Well, I guess like for an example, a good example that all Americans understand. Think about like a conflict, like for example, the U.S. Civil War, where one side was just unequivocally in the right, and the other side was just fighting for slavery, basically. And it's like, what if the Confederacy just refused to surrender forever? What would you have to do? Like, basically just fucking beat them into submission, right? So no one wants that to happen. It could happen, right, in some sort of theoretical decolonization scenario. But I mean, I think basically everyone, at least other than like someone who thinks colonialism was a good thing, would agree that like decolonization, as in, places that are under like colonial rule, or that either direct or that like, are ruled by the remnants of like a former colony. For example, South Africa was, for a good example that everyone knows. Like fighting against that is pretty much unambiguously like making you in the moral right.
What does it mean to fight against that though? Like let's say we have a decolonial
to use an
attitude
example,
in like the modern day. Like what would be a way to fight against that?
To use a good example, South Africa is another good one. So, apartheid ended in 1991. The struggle against apartheid was definitely a decolonial struggle. It might not have ended in like the best way it possibly could have, but it was definitely like a decolonial struggle, as in it was a struggle against this system that was set up by a group of people who had come to South Africa a couple hundred years earlier, sort of gradually conquered and subjugated people who had already lived there. Put themselves at the top of like this society with those people below them, like legally everything. It might not have to be literally legal, but in this case it was very literal. So just a great example to use to start off. And so they did that. They put themselves at the top of this society with the people who already lived there at the bottom. Killed them, stole whatever the fuck they wanted, basically. And that resulted in the 20th century with like the thing that everyone's familiar with, the apartheid South Africa. And so the fight against that was broadly, I guess, mostly focused on getting rid of that sort of system of like formal legal dominance, which was part of the colonial system in South Africa.
It didn't seem like this was a fight against colonialism. Doesn't this feel more like a fight against, say, like unjust oppression? Isn't that more what it's focused on rather than?
Well, unjust oppression is it's a factor of colonialism, right?
Sure, but it just seems like it's kind of a weird way to frame it, like through colonialism rather than like.
Well, we're talking about a country that was quite literally colonized, right?
Yeah, sure, but I
And
mean, like, let's say you
they-
had some country under some like authoritarian rule or whatever, and these people fought against the government because they viewed it as tyrannical or something, right? They could be fighting for all the same reasons that colonized society might be fighting for. I mean, you could frame it that way, but I guess I always get hesitant when people try to frame like every single conflict through their particular lens or every part of a.
Yeah, but I mean,
conflict.
this isn't a lens that you can apply to like every situation ever. Just places where this sort of relation has been set up, and the way that it's set up is so basically, what we're talking about here in relation to South Africa and other places is like there's two types of colonialism interrelated. One is colonialism, which is more about like the extraction of wealth, for example, for the mother country, more so than implanting settlers or whatever to actually live there and develop their own society. And the other one is settler colonialism, which is sort of where rather than the colony being formed to just extract resources, wealth, etc. for the mother country, it's rather formed, or it's either formed for the explicit purpose of, or ends up turning out as like its own sort of thing, right? Like a place where lots of settlers go, and they want to stay permanently, develop settlements in their own society, etc. But that alone isn't really it, right? Like if they did that, without like subjugating the people who already live there, like with some sort of non-coercive agreement, wouldn't be much of a problem with it. What makes it sort of settler colonialism is when they do that and they supplant and replace the pre-existing society rather than sort of fusing with it, becoming a part of it, or anything like that. And that sort of creates a sort of different sort of social relation where we have two groups of people. Like we can call them for this purpose, like I guess settlers, colonizers, or whatever. And the previous group of people, who you could call like indigenous, and that group who like came in and colonized are the ones who sort of dominate this new society. They pretty much unequivocally see the previous population as like a problem that's going to require some sort of solution, which is generally something like assimilation, extermination, deportation, or something like apartheid. So yeah, and I guess like settler colonialism in that respect sort of began in Ireland with the English, and then was sort of exported to the Americas, especially North America, some parts of Africa, etc. It's also been done by people who aren't European as well, like Japan, for example. But I guess that's basically it.
Sure. How is this relevant to like Western world stuff right now, or is this just like strictly used for like?
It's more relevant, I guess, the further along that things are in certain places, right? Like I guess it's relevant, but it's relevant at different levels. Like when I talk about like South Africa, right? Like that was a sort of example of like really evident, like the most evident ongoing colonialism imaginable. But
Okay.
it's a lot more subtle in other places. Like in the US, for example, you have like indigenous groups that are still existing who have basically a fraction of their original territory, if even. And that struggle for their own sorts of their own like self-determination, their own rights, etc.
Yeah, but like, how does that work? Like, what's
struggle.
the solution to that? Like, we're not. I don't even know if it'd be morally right to like give them the territory back. Like, how does that work?
Well, if I can make an analogy that a lot of people are much more familiar with, because it's difficult to introduce this to people who just haven't really thought about this that much, but people have thought about one example of colonialism a whole lot, which is Nazism. A lot of people, we don't really think about it in these terms, but the Nazis were very clear that they saw their invasions of Eastern Europe as sort of a project of colonialism, just on like a very large and much more organized scale than ever before, really. And their goal was to sort of, take the land from the people who live there, kill them, enslave them, deport them, or whatever, and take it for sort of German settlers, right?